You're mid-sentence and you watch it happen in real time. The other person's eyes go soft. They nod, but it's the nod of someone who kind of stopped tracking you sentences ago. But you finish your point and they say totally, and then pivot the conversation to something else entirely. What happened? You weren't boring. You weren't wrong. You just lost their attention. And I've seen how this happens to smart people constantly. People who genuinely have something worth saying. And the reason it happens isn't intelligence or charisma or confidence. It's actual structure and psychology of the way you speak. It is learnable, but most people never study because we weren't taught how to have conversations this way. You're going to fix that. By the end of this episode, you'll have a toolkit for holding attention in any room, a one-on-one, a meeting, a dinner table, a pitch, and you'll learn how to avoid the 4 forgettability traps that make most people stop paying attention to you. I'm Codie Sanchez. This is the Big Deal podcast. Let's get your points heard. Part 1. The attention problem is physiological. Here's something that should humble all of us. The average human, they speak about 125 words per minute, but the human brain processes language at roughly 400 words per minute. So there's a really big gap, right? And your listener's brain, well, they fill it with grocery lists, whatever happened at work, whatever they left the oven on, the door open, because they're not just not paying attention to you. Their brain isn't being lazy. It's literally just efficient running in the background. And it's using all the unused bandwidth your voice isn't filling. So Harvard psychologist Matthew Killingsworth tracked what people were actually thinking during their daily lives. So he used an iPhone app. And it pinged them at these random intervals. What did the data say? People's minds were wandering 47% of the time. So that's almost half of your life, your brain is distracted. And here's the part that actually matters. They reported being less happy when their minds wandered, regardless of what they were thinking about. So it actually makes you happier when you are present. Presence feels better than absence. But presence requires something to hold on to. So the question is, what holds a brain in place and how do we use it so that other people are enraptured by us and we can take up the entirety of their brain processing so that they will hang on every single word? Well, in the 70s, there was a psychologist, Lowenstein, and he was at Carnegie Mellon. And this is interesting. He developed what he called the information gap theory. And this is the theory of curiosity and the gap between the information you present and what other people are piqued by. The idea is really simple. Curiosity isn't triggered by knowing nothing. Nope. It's triggered by knowing almost enough, like a partial answer, a question, but not the resolution, a setup, no payoff. The brain experiences this as a physical discomfort. So a gap, it's like, I got to close this. I know just enough. I got to close the rest. And you felt this too, like the cliffhanger ending of a TV episode. That's the thing that keeps you from going to sleep, right? It's also the thing that brings you back next week. Or the song lyric that you can almost place, the name on the tip of your tongue. Those aren't actually accidents at all in the entertainment space. They're engineered tension. Great communicators, we steal this. And you can use this to engineer tension deliberately. You see, when you're a great communicator, they don't deliver information immediately. They withhold it strategically. So they kind of temporarily hold back to create this pent-up momentum. Think about how the best storytellers open. Do they just tell you what happened? Of course not. Do they give away the hook? Do they tell you all the context and backstory? No. Maybe they start with a question that can't be answered yet. Sometimes I think we worry about 452 things we could do to drive other people to pay attention to us. But what if it doesn't even have to be that you're so brilliant, or you pause perfectly, or you use the uptick perfectly? And instead, it's literally a sentence. So here's the practical rule. Before you explain something, create a reason to care about what you're explaining. I do not want you to lead with the answer. I want you to lead with the gap. Let's give some examples. Let's say that you're in a meeting and you want to answer a question that your boss is asking you. And they say like, hey, why haven't we hit our 2020 revenue targets? And you could just start answering. That's what 99% of people do, but you're not going to be a 99% communicator. Instead, you might say, have you ever wondered why 96% of our leads don't close? What are you doing? You're about to tell him your answer, which is, hey, actually, we don't have a revenue problem from a lead problem. We have a closing problem. The salespeople aren't closing. You could have just said that. But instead, you're asking an interesting question. And he's going to think about that. Now, what does that do? He's like, now I need to know the answer. Now I'm really paying attention. Now she's giving me something interesting. And so they're going to lean in. And I bet you get listened to more often when you do that. Now, think about it even just in a conversation. How many times have you fought for attention? Maybe you're at a dinner, you're with a group of friends, and there are some people that just feel naturally they're storytellers. Maybe they feel more communicative than you do. So let's say that you have something that you want to talk about. You just read something titillating on Twitter, right? You're like, oh, I just listened to this podcast episode from this incredible guy on AI. I want to tell them the story about it. Your natural inclination is going to be you just start talking about it. And you're going to lead with that. I just watched this incredible podcast and this is what happened and blah, 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 blah. And they may or may not be interested in it. But instead, if you think about what piqued your curiosity in that conversation, you might say, have you ever wondered when AI will turn into AGI? And if there will be a day in which we have no jobs and thus the government has to pay us? People are going to be like, what? Why are you? I want to know more about that. Or if you want to be more, easy and straightforward, you could just say, have you ever wondered if the people who created AI are scared by it? Both fascinating questions. And then it might be like, yeah, I have kind of wondered that. And then bam, you give them the answer. So a practical rule is just start with a question. Part 2, the 4 drivers of forgettability. Now that we, know attention is a resource with real neurological limits, brain-based limits, let's talk about how most people burn through it without realizing it. I've found in studying communication and our CEOs and tons of research on the subject that there are 4 drivers that kill conversational presence, and they're all invisible to the person doing them. And we've seen all of these people, but we've never been able to name them. And you cannot not be them if you can't name them. So the first driver, if you want to be completely forgotten and have nobody listen to, you should do this. It's called the context dump. So it's the habit of front loading everything before you get to the point. Have you ever heard somebody go, so okay, a little background. So I've been working on this for a few months and there's a lot of history here. But basically what happened was back in 2019, I was starting to think about a subject. Oh my God, I am so bored. What happens is your listener is waiting for the payload and you're still loading the truck. So the journalists have a phrase for this. They say, you're burying the lead. Have you ever heard that before? Like newspapers, they learned fast that readers are going to bail if you don't get to the good part fast. So what do? The solution is a technique called the inverted pyramid. Both pyramids usually start like this. We're going to go upside down. The most important information, it goes first. Everything else descends from there. In conversation, this means starting with the conclusion, then walking backwards through the evidence. And your brain, it actually resists doing this in storytelling because our brains are made to chronologically order the events. That feels natural, but natural to you is torturous to your listener. Do not context dump. Be short, be sweet, and start with the spice. Driver 2, Semitic energy. Flat delivery creates flat engagement. Now, it doesn't mean what you're saying is flat, but because the brain actually uses variation in voice as a signal, meaning something has changed, something changed means something matters. Something matters means pay attention. So if you're monotone in your delivery, that actively disables this signal. And in fact, it's sort of fascinating if you go and you look at different languages and how they're created. Some languages are really guttural. You hear them back in the back of your throat. That's like German, for instance. Some language have a lot of tonality in it. For instance, that would be like Chinese. One word can actually mean 50 different things. That's like ma, 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 ma. You could have an entire sentence with that word, but it's the way that you deliver it, the tonality, that changes the signal. So the brain actually deprioritizes constant frequency information. It becomes sort of white noise, right? That's why lullabies work. If you want to put somebody to sleep, you just don't vary your tone. It's like why some people watch golf. You just listen to Jim Nantz talk about hitting down the fairway. It's beautiful outside today, right? It's very calming. But if you want them awake, you got to vary everything. Speed, volume, pause. The pause especially. Most people, I think, are terrified of silence in conversation. And I get it. It takes work. It feels uncomfortable. Somebody can steal your spotlight during it, but whoever comes or whatever comes after a well-placed pause, it actually hits with 40% more impact. And that's from real research on speech at the University of Amsterdam. So try really hard to do one thing. If you get silence, use it and allow it to sit there for a moment. Driver number 3, the abstraction ladder. So every idea exists on a spectrum from concrete ideas to abstract. Concrete would be like, she slammed her laptop shut and didn't say anything for 20 minutes. Abstract, the meeting didn't go well. Both sentences are the same thing. That is like literally what happened in both situations. But one of them, you can remember more. You're like, what? She slammed her laptop shut and then she was quiet for 20 minutes? You're going to immediately get a conversation back and forth as opposed to like, the meeting didn't go well. You're like, oh, okay, well, whatever. One of them you are going to remember and the other is forgotten before the next sentence even lands because the human brain actually doesn't care about abstractions. It doesn't store them. In fact, the human brain stores images, stories, specific moments. In fact, one of my executives constantly does this. He really likes to talk in theories. This is a huge mistake you make in communication if you're smart. Smart people like to use big words and abstractions. They think that it makes them sound smart. What it actually does is make you bored. And that is why a bunch of PhDs often have a really hard time getting people's attention, even though they're probably the person you should be listening to on most subjects. But how you'll know you talk in abstractions is when somebody goes something like, theoretically, when we're talking about this from an enlarged perspective, what we really need to ponder inside of our heads is the ability for the outcome to have a different effect. You're like, what the fuck, Todd? What are we talking about? Instead, I want you to speak in those specific moments because when you speak in abstractions, like we need better communication even, the culture is the problem, it's a trust issue, the brain really has no idea what you're talking about. So you got to descend the ladder is what we call it and name the specifics. So cite the particular moment. The concrete detail is what is important, not all this abstract decoration. So for instance, we need to have better communication. That's a terrible sentence. What does that mean? Who defines better? Who defines communication? I have no idea what you're talking about. What would be better instead? We need to have a 5-minute download at the end of every day about what happened and then figure out our plan for the next day. Okay, concrete. We can do that. I'd like you to be nicer to me. Okay, what is nice? How do we define nice? Instead, it'd be better if you said, you know what? I love it when you give me compliments. And when you're upset at me, I really love it when you talk in a very calm tone with me and you give me specific feedback, but you don't raise your voice. That makes me feel like you're being nice to me. Do you see how much more useful that is? I think this is also a big flaw, sorry, ladies, in our female communication. A lot of times we'll be like, be nice, I just want you to be kind. And men are like, I don't have the same definition for the word as you, because we might say, hey, I really want you to express all of your feelings and tell me everything and we could talk about it in detail. And the guy's like, please God, don't do that. That is not kind. So be concrete and do not talk in abstraction. Driver 4, the false finish. This is where you signal the conversation is winding down. You do it through your tone, through the words like, anyway, so basically the bottom line is, but then you keep talking. So it's like you're closing the conversation, but you don't close the conversation. The listener has already checked out. They heard the landing gear. They're ready for landing. And then you're like, nope, back up again in the air. Do this once and they start to lose trust in your structural cues really entirely. Every anyway after that triggers early checkout. So you really need to say less, finish cleaner, and when you signal the end. If you're a salesperson, this is really important. I think we were sold a big lie as salespeople with this one sentence. You'll sell more if you keep them talking. That is not true. You will annoy more people if you keep them talking in this generation. So don't do let me just add one more thing. Let me just add one more thing. You know what's going to happen? They're never going to pick up your phone call again. The only way you're going to sell them is if you get them in that conversation, and then you're probably going to have a really high refund rate. So just make it the end when it's the end. For the love of all that's holy for all of us, please. Part 3, the mechanics of memorability. So holding attention is one problem. Being remembered, totally different one. And they require different tools, but we're going to give them to you. So by the end of this, you can make people pay attention to you and then you can keep them. There's a study in 1885. This guy by the name of Hermann Ebbinghaus published what became known as the forgetting curve. He basically tested his own memory on nonsense syllables over time and found that within 24 hours, people forget roughly 70% of all new information. With a week, 90%. It's almost all gone. It's almost all gone. So most of what you say, it just evaporates. And it's not because the listener isn't even listening. It's because the brain is running constant triage. It's figuring out what's worth keeping, because everything you keep costs some type of metabolic energy to store. So the brain is not going to store something unless you give it a reason. And there are now 3 proven mechanisms that interrupt the forgetting curve. The first one is emotional encoding. This is fascinating. So the neuroscientists, Joseph Ledoux at NYU, has spent decades basically mapping how the amygdala, so that's the brain's emotional processing center, interacts with memory formation. Basically, TLDR, emotional arousal triggers the release of norepinephrine, which essentially flags to the brain, this is important. So the more emotion, the more you're going to trigger a chemical that says, keep this shit. This is why you remember exactly where you were on certain days with like unusual clarity, such as if you're old enough, where you were when JFK died. If you're old enough, where you were at 9/11. If you have a scent of your grandma, what her house always smells like. If you had a traumatic event, you might remember weird smells, weird sounds, weird people. And that is why we can remember very odd, spiky events, but you can't remember what you had for lunch yesterday. And this is really emotionally neutral information, doesn't get the flag. It doesn't get stored. So what does this mean for you? If you can use emotional cues in context, it is going to have a much higher shelf life. Like, you don't need to be dramatic, but you do need to give the listener a reason to feel something about what you're telling them. If you can connect the info you want to give them with an emotion that they care about and you slap them together, that's going to make them remember. And so some of the questions you could ask yourself is like, what changes if they get this right? What goes wrong if they don't? Have you ever noticed in podcasts, it's a new thing I've seen lately, where people will say, can you tell our listener how their life is going to change by listening to this podcast today? What are they trying to do? They're trying to get you right now to have an emotional change, an emotional cue before they give you a bunch of information. They're telling you why to care. And so the response might be like, well, everything in their life will change. Well, they'll never get divorced. Well, they'll make more money. Well, they'll do what happened to me and they'll become happier, right? Whatever. And so I want you to ask yourself, when you're speaking, how can you not just rattle off dates, names, numbers, but tie an emotion to them? Let's say you want someone to remember something very specific for you, like a birthday. I have a terrible memory, so I have a hard time remembering things like dates. So one of the best things that my husband does about it is every time he wants me to remember something important, like potentially his birthday, he will tie an emotional cue to it. He'll tell me a story about how when he was a little kid, his birthday was so close to Christmas that he was always sad because he only got one present. He always only got a Christmas present, not a birthday. He never had a birthday party because Christmas was so close. And so he was always a little sad that these other kids got the opportunity to have, Christmas parties and birthdays, and he never got both. And he would show me a picture of little Christopher, and that tied of the picture and this image of a little lonely boy and somebody who never got a birthday and a Christmas makes me remember the date, even though typically I'm not going to. By the way, December 16th. And it took me a while because I literally cannot remember numbers for the life of me. So when you want somebody to remember something specific, tie emotion to it. Mechanism 2, the peak end effect. So this psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, who's incredible, he's run some of my favorite experiments. And one of them that he ran was in the 1990s. And it's kind of a funny one. It involves patients undergoing colonoscopies. Not the most glamorous research, I know, but I like also who comes up with this stuff. But the findings changed how we think about memory. He found that the patients remembered the experience of the procedure was determined almost entirely by two moments. The most intense moment, the peak, and the final moment, the end. Just those two. So what does this mean in practice when you're not getting a colonoscopy? People don't remember the totality of the conversation almost ever. They're not going to remember what you said in its entirety. They're going to remember the sharpest moment and the last impression. So if you have a conversation and it's genuinely surprising, insightful, or you have a moving moment and it ends cleanly on a high note, that other person is going to remember it as a great conversation, even if in the middle you kind of bumblefuck your way around and it's kind of mediocre. But the inverse is also true. So a strong conversation, you have like an amazing date. It's an incredible evening, but then it ends badly. That is most likely what you're going to be remembered for. The bad ending, not the 99% of the conversation. So what do we do? Well, there's two ways to think about it. You can be like, oh my God, now I'm so stressed. I got to just nail some highlight and the end. Instead, I like to think about it like there's only two things you have to care about. One, you got to end deliberately. The last thing you say is disproportionately what gets stored. I think about this in speeches all the time. I always try to end my speeches on the highest note that I possibly can because they're almost going to forget all of it. It's fascinating. I've given maybe thousands of speeches now. Almost always, they quote back to me whatever was on my last slide. And just think about now, if it's you, when you're having a conversation, imagine what the end of the conversation is, like a last slide that you're going to leave them with. Mechanism number 3, the self-reference effect. This one is super underused, but it's not going to be by you because it is almost universally effective. So basically what happens in the 70s, this guy T.B. Rogers found that information is remembered way better when it's processed in relation to the self. So basically when somebody asks, how does this apply to me? And if you do that while hearing information, the other person who's listening is going to remember it at a rate dramatically higher than when they receive the same information neutrally. It's actually fascinating. We see it a lot here with the guests we bring. I'm always trying to get them to like talk to you. I'm like, imagine it is about this one person. A lot of times guests come on podcasts and they're like, blah, 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 all this stuff about me. Here's my history, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't matter to you. You're like, man, what is in it for me? Am I going to get richer, hotter, smarter, happier, make more of an impact listening to you? If not, beat it, right? So I want you to think about the practical application. Don't just make your point. Make it about them. You're not doing this in a manipulative way, but in a relevant way. Connect the information you want to share to their situation, their goals, their specific problem. And there's lots of ways to do this. But let's say you're like, you know what I can't stand at work when people don't show up on time and then I've got to wait for them. And it's so annoying and that happened to me today. Okay, fine. Instead, you could say, isn't it annoying when you go to work and you're waiting on somebody else and they don't show up on time? And doesn't it ever make you feel like they don't respect you and that actually they think their time is more important than yours? Have you ever felt like that? Like, okay, now it's about it's the same story. I'm telling him how I feel in a situation, but it's here's how this shows up for you. That's way more memorable than the general principle. So even if you're going to complain, like I was just doing, it's better if you can reference somebody else. This is called personalized relevance. And it's not a courtesy. It's actually a multiplier. The same principle applies to every medium of communication and none more than newsletters. Most newsletters die for exactly the reason most conversations die. They're not meaningfully connected to their audience. That's the problem Beehive solves. So giving you the tools to actually understand your audience and reach them. Beehive is the platform serious newsletter operators use to actually understand their audience and converse with them memorably. The analytics show you exactly what's landing, which posts people finish, which ones they abandon, where you're losing them. The segmentation tools you personalize at scale so your content hits the self-reference effect every time. Monetization is built in. Subscriptions, the ad network, boosts, so you're not duct taping 6 different tools together just to get get paid. And the growth infrastructure compounds, referral programs, recommendation networks, SEO optimized web posts that keep working after you hit send. If you already have a newsletter, but on another platform, don't worry. You can migrate all of your paid subscriptions and content with a few clicks. In fact, that's what I did. Go to beehive.com/Codie and use code Codie30 to save 30% off your first 3 months. That's BEEHIIV.com/Codie. Go build something people remember. Now, the most counterintuitive point in this entire episode, and the one most people miss completely, is the listener's trap. So the biggest barrier to being memorable in a conversation you have isn't how you talk. It's how you listen. And I know this sounds sort of touchy-feely, like everybody believes this, listen, and then people will listen to you, but it's actually true. So most people listen to respond. They track the conversation like just enough to find their opening. Then the moment they can drop the thing they've been waiting to say since 30 seconds ago goes in. The problem is the science tells us the listener feels this. They feel that energy shift when you stop tracking what they're saying. Eyes change, nodding gets slightly ahead of words, body orients maybe away. So what's the trap here? If you want to be more interesting to talk to, if you want to be described as magnetic or captivating, almost everybody who is that, they're universally the best listeners in the room, not the best talkers. And so the research tells us from Nicholas Epley at the University of Chicago that people drastically overestimate how interesting they are to others and drastically underestimate how much others value being heard. It's the old adage that we've heard from Never Eat Alone, for instance, or How to Make Friends and Influence People, which is if you want people to remember you, let them talk more. The journalists have known this for decades. Before a big interview, good reporters study everything about their subject. And they do this because then when the subject is talking, they can show how much they care about them, but it also gives them the ability to listen. When you know enough background, you stop spending that processing power in your brain reconstructing context in real time. You just hear what's being said. You notice the detail I almost skipped over, the pause before an answer that was faster than everything else, the moment they described as minor, but that actually maybe explains everything. This tool is what therapists call active listening. And journalists call staying in the question, which is a great line. How do you stay in the question as opposed to get distracted elsewhere? It means when someone answers, you actually respond to what they said rather than what you expected them to say. It also is how you follow the thread they laid, not the one you brought in. And it takes some discipline, but you will become more interesting by making yourself more interested in them. And the paradox here is to be remembered as a great conversationalist, you actually just need to talk less. And if there's one thing you should walk away with today, it's this. Attention is actually biological. The brain is constantly processing info in the background. So if you don't give it something to hold on to, a gap to close, a stake to care about, a concrete image to store, it will go somewhere else. The recap, lead with a gap. Bury your deliverability. Stay concrete. End when you signal you're ending. Give information emotional stakes. Engineer one sharp moment per conversation. And that ability to listen genuinely with curiosity, without the answer already loaded, that is going to make people remember you from a decade ago. The kicker to all of this is it's way easier to be charismatic than you think it is. And you don't ever have to be in a situation where people aren't listening to you and you want to be heard. Again, you can learn how to change that. In fact, you just did. You might want to go back and listen to this one more time. I know I'm going to do that again. And send it to somebody who you know has something to say and just needs a little nudge on how to say it better. I'm Codie Sanchez. We'll see you next week. You've had a decision sitting on your desk for 2 weeks. You keep telling yourself you're just like gathering information. You're not. You're stalling. And while you stall, someone less qualified just did a worse version of your idea, and they are about to eat your lunch. People like me. Here's the lesson history keeps screaming at us. Speed wins. Every time. And I am obsessed with it right now because I and my team are not moving fast enough. So today, we're going to talk about speed. The 3 laws that'll rewire how you make decisions, 5 moves that you can run Monday morning, and we're going to show you the real-life proof from Instagram, Square, Amazon, the fastest companies in the world about how the operator almost always wins when they move faster. You do not have to be smarter. You don't have to have more money. You just need to move faster. So today, you stop overthinking and you start moving. I'm Codie Sanchez, and this is the Bigdeal podcast. Let's hurry up and go, huh? I have one quick ask, though, before we dive in. If this kind of episode is useful for you, do me a personal favor and hit subscribe. It tells me what's landing and helps me make more of what actually helps you. And if you ever wanted to support what we do here at The Bigdeal, this is the best way. So hit subscribe. Thank you so much. Let's dive in. All right, we've been taught that slow is safe. Like, you know the sayings, measure twice, cut once, good things take time, patience is a virtue. All of that is true, I guess, somewhere, but almost none of it is true in business or in your career. To be clear, speed isn't the same as recklessness. Recklessness is like you go really fast, you ignore all the consequences. Speed is just compressing the distance between you and reality. And also, can we just stop comparing the two? Like, isn't that crazy? Why does our brain immediately go, but if I'm fast, that can't be good? That is so dumb. Usain Bolt, really fucking fast, really good. So when you move fast, it's not that you don't avoid mistakes, you just find them faster. So then you fix them faster, then you learn them faster, and it is a dangerous loop. When you move slowly and with too much care, you actually don't even see the future as fast as the person sitting next to you. And so like my real life story this AM, I got really frustrated that our newsletters were taking days to write at my company. So on Sunday, I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna do this live. And I set a time limit and I wrote 2 newsletters in under an hour using an agent that is better than most of what we write. And I did it because I was so fed up with the time we're wasting, just like mentally masturbating over nothing. And then I sent it to my newsletter writers, sorry guys, and I told them, this is the new standard. Like, we should have a V1 in under an hour, and then we can have multiple shots on goal, like multiple trials of a newsletter. This idea of waiting days for something that is less than 3,000 words and basically dead is over. That is why I'm doing this podcast today. It's for you, but it's also for me. It's also for my team, and also for all of us to make more money. So I want you to think about it like this. Every decision you face has a shelf life. The information you have on it is super fresh right now, right? Your conviction, strong today. The opportunity, most available today. Every day you wait, 3 really scary things happen at the same time, and they happen invisibly. 1, your data ages, meaning like the context you're deciding in is already different tomorrow than it was today. So you think you're like gathering information, but actually you're watching that bread go stale. Number 2, your conviction starts to erode. Like your certainty peaks at the moment you first see the problem clearly, right? And every time you re-review the option, like you give yourself little chances for doubt. By week 2 or 3, the decision actually feels harder than day 1 because your brain has literally beaten itself into a fog and given it lots of different options. And by 3, your window closes. Other people are moving, teams are shipping. So every day you wait, a competitor, a customer, or a market condition gets closer to making the decision for you. Not good. So what's the takeaway here? Is that you eat the fruit when it's the freshest. Moving quickly means going through the Overton window while your conviction is high and your data is relevant. So you run, you don't walk. Information doesn't age like wine. It ages like milk, which ain't good. So here's the tool that I use so you can steal it. I call it the decay question. For any major decision you put across your plate, ask yourself, is what I learn in the next 30 days worth more than what I lose by not starting? Answer, 9 times out of 10 is fucking no. For 90% of decisions, the honest answer is no. And the 10% where the answer is yes, you're dealing with a genuine one-way door and you should take your time. I'm going to get to that in a minute. It's one of my favorite stories of all time from one of my favorite entrepreneurs. But I actually want to take you back in time first to a guy by the name of Jim McKelvey in St. Louis in 2009, who almost sold a $2,000 piece of art at an art fair. The buyer was ready. He had the money, But McKelvey, the glassblower, he couldn't take it. You see, he was an artisan, not a shop with a full point of sale system. And at that time, that meant his customers had to pay in cash or walk away empty-handed. So he lost the sale. McKelvey was pissed, right? So he called his friend Jack Dorsey, the co-founder of Twitter, who had interned for him actually as a teenager, to rant about this thousands lost. And Dorsey said, why don't we just fix that? 3 weeks later, 3 weeks, people, they had a working credit card reader that plugged into an iPhone, and that simple product launched the company Square. After seeing all the success that Square had, Amazon, big baby Amazon, they launched a competitive product called Amazon Local Register. It's a mobile credit card reader for small businesses, and it had lower fees. So it was way cheaper. It's backed by $100 billion Bezos with the brightest minds in tech. And less than a year later, Amazon realized Square's lead was going to be impossible to catch up to, so it quietly shut down Amazon Local Register. What's the lesson? Square won because they pounced on the market years earlier when conviction was high. McKelvey missed his sale. Data was relevant. McKelvey had no way of accepting credit cards at that moment. And the window was open. There was no point of sale system options for a small sole proprietor. They moved fast, so they won. So, if you're currently sitting on a decision about a change in market, maybe it's AI, a new competitor, a shift in your customers' behavior, you don't have more time than you think. You have less. In fact, I just got in a little scuffle with one of my team members about that this morning. I have a rule. It's called the 24-hour rule. And now I think it's even a shorter rule. It might be the 2-hour rule now. But the rule is when you meet with somebody that you want something from, you should overwhelm them with the speed at which you respond back after the meeting with something impressive. So we had just met with these investors. And the investors that we met with were going to give us millions of dollars in one of our companies. And I got pissed because it was Friday afternoon, Friday evening. Do you think we got that response out to them that day? We did not. So guess what happened? They beat us to it on Monday. And what happens when you do that? You show them that they move faster than you do. I hate that. So I want you to be like Square. When you see an opportunity, don't hesitate, go. Like real life Slack that inspired this podcast today, my team said they would get back to me in a week. And it's this. If you're on YouTube, you can see it right now. Also, hi, YouTube, like and subscribe. I just sent this out to this team as I was reviewing what I wanted to talk to you guys about. And basically what it says here is, no, don't wait a week. Let's spin this up in 24 hours and see if anyone bites. If they do, we'll build it, which basically means we don't have a product. We're not ready actually to launch this, but I want to spin it up, see if we can get credit cards. And if we can't, we're going to launch it and then we'll figure it out. We'll build the airplane on the way down. That's how you should work in this world today. Otherwise, you're, as the kids say, nig me, not going to make it. And, it's not just these stories from me or Square, this story is so good. I don't think it's told enough. So in 2010, there's this guy by the name of Kevin Systrom, and he had a dying check-in app called Bourbon. Like it wasn't going to make it. It had like 100 users, $500,000 of VC money in the bank, and a product that apparently nobody wanted. But when Systrom looked at the data, he noticed that users, there's 100 of them, loved Bourbon's creative photo posting functions. So he pivoted. He got rid of check-ins and he kept the photos. And he rebranded his Instagram. Instagram launches in like October of 2010, and the response is insane. 18 months later, Facebook pays a billy for them, and only 13 employees are on the payroll at that time, which is wild. We have like 100 employees, just so you know. And sadly, I'm not quite at $1 billion yet. But here's the key takeaway. It's not just that they pivoted. People do that all the time. It's that they moved fast. Like every competitor in photo sharing was still running roadmap reviews while Instagram was live and growing. So Systrom didn't have better data than his competitors. He just acted while the data was still fresh. So don't let yourself get pulled into decision decay, because decision decay is the why. So now you need 2 rules for the how. And I want to steal these from like one of the best entrepreneurs of all time, whether you like him or hate him. It's the bald man himself, Jeff Bezos. And rule number 1 is the 70% rule. So in his shareholder letters, which are amazing, he has one in particular from 2016. And he talks about that most decisions should be made with 70% of the information you wish you had. If you wait for 90, you're too slow. And in most cases, slow is more expensive than wrong. And so why 70? Because in Bezos's eyes, the last 30% of the information is always really expensive to get, right? Like you're like, when I have more of that, when I can figure that all out. No. The first 70% comes fast. So ask yourself, am I at 70%? If yes, move and then correct once you're in motion. The second one is called the door test. And I love this idea so much. I use it all the time. I think my husband actually introduced me to it first. He'll say to me, is this a one-way or a two-way door? What does that mean? Every decision is one of two types. A one-way door is reversible. Selling your company, firing a senior employee, committing capital you can't get back. Those deserve care. Like the door only opens one way. You can't go back through it. Does that make sense? Whereas like a two-way door is reversible. You walk through it, look around, and then you go, I don't like this place, next bar, right? So that might be something like testing a price, hiring a new contractor, posting something publicly. The 2016 letter basically says, you should make these moves fast by high judgment people and don't use a fucking committee. Committees are where dreams go to die. The smaller the group of people, the better. In fact, Shopify famously works in teams of 5. They say the best teams are all 5. And so they have like a 3,300, I believe, R&D, research and development group. And even in there, they have teams of 5 inside of the 3,300s. So most organizations fall into something where they treat every decision like a one-way door. And you probably do this in your life too. You're like, well, I don't know. Should I go to this event? I can't decide. It's like, what's the problem if you decide later? I don't know, should my kids and I go on vacation here and there? I don't know. Can we make that, is that like a life-changing decision or not? Like how many low-level decisions do we make every single day that we treat like one-way doors and they aren't? So do an audit tonight. Look at your 5 most stuck decisions. Probably at least 3 of them are two-way doors. So walk through, baby. Stop treating it like you can't go back. And the research is actually really on his side. There's actually a really fascinating phenomenon. I believe it's called the Zeigarnik effect. I don't know. You guys tell me if I'm spelling that or saying that right on the internet. But this shows how unfinished tasks occupy disproportionate mental bandwidth. Like, you know what I'm talking about, right? Like your brain hates that open loop that you're like, oh, my mom's kind of famous for this one. Sorry, mom. She, every time we leave the house, I swear to Christ, I'm 39 years old. Every time we leave the house, she goes, did I unplug the curling iron? Did we shut the garage door? It's like, is looping every time. And those small decisions, they eat away at your cognitive power. So if you've been feeling foggy, scattered, and drained, look at your decisions and close those loops. And, while we're being honest about what's actually draining your cognitive performance, let's talk about the one thing that sits underneath all of it, the thing that makes the 70% rule possible, that makes fast, high conviction decisions feel natural instead of terrifying: sleep, specifically deep sleep. That's why I'm obsessed with 8 Sleep, and I use it. The 8 Sleep Pod is a smart cover that goes on your existing mattress. It heats or cools each side independently down to 55 degrees all night automatically. And as we move into spring and nights start heating up, this becomes the single biggest lever of your sleep quality, especially because I like it warm and my husband likes it like an icicle. I'm not okay with that. So for every degree your sleep environment rises above what your body optimally needs, you actually lose deep sleep. So the pod eliminates that variable entirely. This is crazy, actually, but users see up to 34% more deep sleep, fall asleep up to 44% faster, and have an HRV. I'm too fancy for that, but that basically means your heart rate up 13% on average, which the doctors tell me is very good. And it tracks all of it: heart rate, respiratory rate, sleep stages, no wearable, nothing on your wrist, clinical grade accuracy built directly into your bed. The AI behind it, autopilot, learns your patterns and adjusts in real time. The Aston Martin F1 team uses it for athlete recovery. Just like me, we're pretty much the same. I mean, so does, people much smarter than me: Andrew Huberman, Mark Zuckerberg. These are people who have optimized everything and they still made room for this. So you can use code DEAL at 8sleep.com/bigdeal for up to $350 off the pod. You get 30 days to try it at home. And if you don't like it, you can send it back. Go to 8sleep.com/bigdeal, code DEAL, because I'm pretty positive I've never had a single person on this pod who has ever bought this thing that sent it back. In fact, all of my friends wait for me to get the deal and then they buy it for them and all the beds in their house. So you're welcome. This is one of my favorite things for sleep that exists in the world. Just ask husband Chris. Okay, so I actually want to also talk about a second study. So the 2000 Columbia Jam experiment. So what is this? It's fascinating. Two psychologists set up 2 jam booths at a grocery store. One booth, and jam, like jam, jelly. One booth had 24 varieties of jam. Then the other has 6 varieties of jam. The 24 jam booth pulled in way more traffic. Whoa, look at all these things. But only 3% of people who tasted it actually bought. The 6 jam booth, well, 30% of the people who walked up, they bought. That's 10 times higher. And that proves that analysis paralysis is real and measurable. So when you keep every option open, your conversion rate on actually executing collapses. Moving fast forces you to cut options. Cutting options is how you reach action. So the research all kind of comes together on one conclusion. Commit to constraints. Like if you can just reduce your choices and make those decisions, watch how your life improves. And I can tell you firsthand because I do it too. There's also still maybe one lingering barrier, perfection. And the objection I hear the most is something along the lines, and tell me if you feel this, or you can write in the comments what your objection is to moving fast. If I move fast, quality suffers, right? That's actually what we call a false dichotomy. 2 things do not need to be true. So let's reframe that. Quality and speed aren't opposites. Perfection and speed are. Quality means the output works. Your customer's happy, the dinner's good enough, the outfit's good enough, the workout's good enough, the problem's solved, you've moved forward. I think a lot of times we just get obsessed with perfection and can we have 0 flaws? I don't know. I've never met that. No typos, every edge case handled, every stakeholder signed off. That's unreasonable. Quality is your goal. Perfection is the trap you have to avoid on the way to it. And I really like to think about it like that. Imagine you're walking down a path. And as you go on the path, at the end of the path, you can see your goal. And in the middle of the path is a giant cavernous black hole that says perfection on it. And if you get too close to that thing, it's just going to grab you. But if you skirt the edges, you won't be perfect. You won't stay perfectly on the path. You'll maybe get a little lost, but you'll get back on the goal. And you'll stay forward momentum. And so the worst entrepreneurs, I think, try to ship at 100% and end up shipping at 40% 6 months later because they never had real data to work against. And I think in this world we're in today, this is more true than ever. I don't know about you, but I certainly don't feel like I have less inputs. There's less content I can watch. There's less distractions. Everything's more of everything. And so I think you have to start narrowing down. And I love this line by Reid Hoffman. He said, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you shipped too late. It's funny because I was trying to think about example stories for this one. And what I came to, I cannot think of a single time in which I shipped a product and it was perfect. Ever. I've been, entrepreneurship for 15, 16 years. By now, I've never shipped a perfect product. I've probably always been too early. I'm notorious for always underpricing things, not overpricing them or appropriately pricing them. And when I started Contrarian Thinking, I offered a lifetime membership to something that required my time every single week. And I think I charged people $499 for it for a lifetime of access. What was I thinking? And I remember people still get mad. I had lifetime access. I was I had to close that whole product line because that thing made so little sense. But that little thing that made no sense, that was way underpriced, got me to where I am today. So here's 5 moves you can make to increase your speed and get the win and not let those little mistakes stop you. Okay, you ready for the 5? Okay, 1. End every meeting with a decision or a deletion. If the meeting didn't produce one or the other, it was therapy. That's not a meeting. If the next meeting can't produce either, cancel it. Just don't even have the meeting. Okay? 2, 24-hour rule. You already heard me talk about this a little bit, but every decision that's a 2-way door, any reversible decision in your life gets made within 24 hours of being surfaced. New vendor, bam, tomorrow. New test, run it tomorrow. The shot clock of 24 hours forces clarity. I'm considering making it faster. 24 hours may be too slow in today's world. But let's chill out for right now. We'll start with 24. 3, kill one recurring meeting in your life this week. Pick the weak one, the one where everyone shows up with nothing and leaves with nothing. Kill it. Send a note instead. If nobody asks for it back after 2 weeks, it's proof you made the right decision. Also on this one, be pissed if somebody wastes your time or your team's time. I had a meeting this week where a guy was supposed to come with a bunch of ideas. One of my members is located in the UK. The guy stayed up until like 9 or 10 at night, UK time, to be at this meeting. And the guy who was supposed to come with all the ideas didn't come with ideas fully flushed at all. Now, for me, it was like 3 or 4, I don't know time differences, but it was during my workday. So like I could have just been like, okay, well, whatever. But I said, please exit the meeting to this guy. And I said, did you guys think those ideas were fully flushed out? The team said no. I go, Christian, do you feel like you wasted your Friday night, or was this useful for you? And he said, no, this wasn't very useful for me. And I said, I'm so sorry. It's totally unacceptable that we should take away your time. Somebody else didn't prep so that you had to waste your day. Not okay. And so that was the feedback we gave him. We said, if you're going to do that again, please pick another company, because this isn't going to roll here. And I value my team's time. I want these motherfuckers to work hard, but I don't want them to have to work harder than they need to, like ever. I don't want them to waste their time. That's just mean. And so think about where in your life can you do the exact same thing? Kill time vampires. 4, write the press release first. I love this. Before you build anything new or pursue a new idea, write a faux press release. Like, what does it do? Why does the customer care? How is it different? If it's not compelling, should we build it? This is going to compress months of planning into an afternoon. And then step 5, maybe the most important, disagree and commit. Your team does not need consensus. Not everybody has to agree. It needs commitment. It needs commitment. Anybody can disagree publicly and push back hard. That's okay. But there will be a moment where you will have to say, we are moving through this. And so at our company, we say disagree but commit. So full effort, no sabotage. This single cultural move will triple your speed. Just one other example from this weekend, because I was apparently on a fucking roll this weekend. Tell me if you guys want a podcast on this. I'm kind of obsessing on it. Tell me in the comments and I'll do a different one. But I really don't like when people think small. I think it's like the single reason why most people don't live a big, beautiful life is that they have like these it's almost like you put yourself in a coffin and don't realize that the walls of the coffin are made of paper. Like, okay, you just break out of that bitch. And so this weekend, we had one of those moments where a team member basically was like, well, I think we should do X instead of Y. And the X was a small move. It was the safe play. And I won't out him because, this is a great employee, but I basically had to I wrote a strongly worded email and the email just said like, we need to think big when we talk to vendors. And if you're not going to think big yet, or you're not ready to, or I haven't prepared you to think big yet, or you don't understand thinking big, that's my fault, not yours, that I haven't rubbed that off on you yet. But if you can't think big, don't talk to vendors. Just don't talk to them. Hand them off to me or the other members of the team that get it. And when you get it, you can talk to them again. But like, do not play small on my dime. And the payoff here is going to be big, you guys. Every competitor you have is slower than they should be. And speed is like sitting there, free, untouched, available to anybody willing to pick it up. And I want you to obsess on this so much that I do these workshops at Contrarian Thinking all about speed. They're called Growth Accelerator workshops. And we think about how can we collapse 12 months of work into 72 hours? How can we collapse 4 months of results into 72 hours? On average, we find anywhere from $4 to $7 million in hidden money inside of business owners' own business during the event. It's max 100 people here with me in Austin. If you haven't come to one and you own a business, I want to invite you out. It is probably my favorite event that we throw in person because it's a workshop. It's not just a speech. So if this is interesting for you, link in the description below. We only do these 4 times a year, so get on the wait list for one of them. Because the truth is, you don't need a perfect idea, a perfect product, or a perfect solution. You need a faster clock. Like enough cycles with a fast clock allows you to bury the slow operator, not beat them. And in the game of business, it is a war between winning and losing. So here's your homework. Pick one decision tonight, something reversible, something you've been sitting on longer than a week. Run the decay question on it. Is what you'll learn in the next 30 days worth what you'll lose? For most of them, let's be honest, look me right in the windows to my soul and tell me the answer is no, right? We got to decide before the sun comes up tomorrow. You'll learn more from being wrong in 24 hours than from being perfect in 24 weeks. Winners move fast. You're a winner, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Thank you for spending your time with me. I'll see you next week on the Bigdeal podcast. And if you got a slow ass friend, send them the link to this. Or employee, I'll yell at them for you. What is a think tank, and what influence do they even have on Washington? And what was your purview of seeing in through that lens to the center of power?
Yeah, and that's generally been my lens into that world. Is I've always been more of a policy person first and a political person second. I mean, when you work in a think tank, especially in Washington, D.C., you have to deal with politics because the people whose attention you're trying to get are politicians or their staff. Really, it's political leaders and the media are kind of your two main audiences. And so a think tank is like a catch-all term for a certain type of organization, but they really exist along a continuum. And they're usually a combination of research, a general set of principles that the people who work there tend to agree on, and then a goal of taking that research and their commentary and their writing or their podcasts and to influence the public debate. So to change the way that policymakers are thinking about tax policy, education policy, what to think about Israel right now, how do we resource the effort in Ukraine or not, and all those things. And some think tanks are a little bit more political in the sense that they're really trying to influence how politicians in this particular cycle think. Some of them have sort of house views where all the scholars kind of have to sing off the same song sheet in their work. And then some of them, like the American Enterprise Institute, where I was, the scholars, it's a little bit more like a university where the scholars are, they have independence. They don't get told what to write or what to say, but they work at AEI for a reason. They believe in the principles of a free society. They're wary of regulatory intrusion into the commercial market space. So people would say, well, they're free market people, but they are. But they're across a continuum as well in terms of some will favor a particular type of regulation while others oppose it, and sometimes AEI scholars have disagreed in public, and I've always liked that about the place. But you see think tanks to the right, to the left, who are a little bit more politically driven in terms of their mission, but they all kind of get called think tanks because they generally bring people that have some kind of academic training or some kind of expertise within policy, and their goal is to influence the way that policymakers and the media think about those things.
Well, I don't think I realized before I started getting involved with any of this stuff that there's that joke in Washington, D.C. that all the policy is written by 20-year-old staffers.
Yeah, right.
And
far from the truth.
Right. What's interesting, I think, is as a person outside of the spectrum, you forget that half of the policies are like these 17,000 page, overwhelming pieces of paper to people who may only be in office for like 1 or 2 terms, really don't understand the political apparatus, don't know how to make real change. And so they might come to a place like AEI or reference your research to say, like, please pull me 15, different ideas on how to make a city more profitable and better to live in. But they're not pulling it from like the Wall Street Journal often. Right. They're pulling it from academic papers, just like a scientist or a doctor might do the same thing before they prescribe something for a patient, right? Is that kind of how that works?
I mean, there comes a point where if you are, just for example, writing the text for the 2017 tax reform bill, there were some crazy ideas in that original version. You're not going to actually figure out what to think reading really smart writers at the Wall Street Journal or whatever, because their job is to cover it rather than to do the analysis. And so at times like that, Hill staffers, some of whom are in their 20s, and then the more senior ones hopefully are older than that and have some expertise. Now, you have some long-standing members of committees on the Hill who really are policy experts, and everybody kind of looks to them. But then they'll look to a think tank like AEI or some of the others and ask the scholars who have expertise, say, in these aspects of tax policy, to come in and brief them on what their own analysis, their own modeling, their own regressions, like what they see if we include this one particular provision. And so all think tanks in Washington have a lot of public events, that, you can live stream them, you can come and hear scholars talk. But I always felt like the most important work that we did was the stuff that wasn't on camera. It was the stuff that was behind those closed doors in meetings where people were debating whether or not this particular provision would have this kind of effect on the economy. And that's where you have the most influence. I mean, during the COVID relief bills that, when we were all kind of trying to figure out what was going on with the the pandemic and exactly what the right federal response should be. Again, a lot of bad ideas out there, and they needed to sift through exactly what the right kind of stimulus or not should be for the economy. And our scholars were involved in those discussions, and I think had an outsized influence on the results, whether you like them or not. I mean, that's when think tanks can really shine, is at times like that, where you realize there are people who realize this is a really big deal. Put politics aside right now. We're trying to figure out what the right policy is. And then you need some experts to come in and do that work. And in universities, where I am now, and I love the university world, and we're building something similar at the University of Texas. A lot of people that are tenured professors in a department, they don't have experience converting their research into kind of policy briefs or whatever. And that's what think tanks can do for them, is to take their research and make it digestible for people that are trying to figure out the consequences of some decision.
I love creating content, obviously. We post like 50 pieces of content across all my platforms each week. But if you've ever created content, you know the uphill battle it can be to ideate, write, produce, and film a video. And then you have to edit it all. So one of my favorite tools to use for this is Riverside. You've probably heard about it before. It's really revolutionized the podcast space by allowing creators all over the world to record 4K video regardless of the internet speed. But they've just released an update that any creator is going to love. So along with recording high quality video and audio, they've added in editing software so you can edit any video content directly in Riverside. If your team is a little more bougie like mine and wants to record the video themselves, you can upload your own content to Riverside so you can use all of their amazing AI tools. It can transcribe your video and add in customizable captions. It can analyze that transcript to cut out the dead space in the video. And my favorite part, they have this AI editor feature that will pull short form clips from my content so we can squeeze all the juice out of what we create. Time is money, and Riverside has given me and my team back loads of time, aka money. So I love them. And because I love you, I got you guys a deal. Try Riverside for yourself with the link in this episode's description. You can sign up for free using the link and discount code CODY at checkout for a discount on any paid plan. By the way, the first 1,000 people who click on this link and use the coupon code will get an exclusive 30% off with code CODY30 with the QR code on the screen. Even our doggo likes it. Let's get back to the episode.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I remember one of the more interesting things we ever did was we sat down at AEI and you guys put us through a war game with China and Taiwan. And before that, I didn't realize that that's what happened when we sometimes explain things to policymakers, where even that might be what happens inside of the Pentagon. Can you explain what a war game is?
Yeah, it's a way of creating in this case, a geopolitical sort of scenario, and giving people the opportunity to understand that if you make one particular decision, they invade, they don't, our response is this kind of air power, this kind of naval response. That means we're moving resources from some other part of the world, for instance, right? And so you actually start to realize what's involved in these decisions. It's always trade-offs, right? And so when you're engaged in kind of a large-scale military effort, it means there's other capabilities that you don't have elsewhere in the world. And so war game, it kind of puts people in that scenario and makes you understand from a cost perspective, from a personnel perspective, what sorts of decisions that might seem easy if you're just watching a cable news show all of a sudden becomes super complex. And we've used it in other scenarios too. I mean, I worked in the George W. Bush White House for a few years, and I was there during Hurricane Katrina. And, we realized that there were certain war game scenarios that had been played out before that had relevance to that time. When you have 500,000 people displaced from an urban area, and this was not too many years after 9/11, where we thought that something like a dirty bomb could happen. Like, what would happen if a radioactive bomb went off in a city and now all of a sudden 500,000 people couldn't live there anymore? What would you, first of all, there's the site, but then there's the dispersion of people. And we were faced with a situation because of what happened in New Orleans, that you basically did have 500,000 people no longer living there that went to Houston, or they went up to Tennessee, or they scattered about, and there wasn't a really great preset federal response for how to actually get resources to people so that they could, stay in hotels or pay their rent or get the resources that they need because of this horrific event. And you can use that type of war game precedent to actually make decisions. So it's helpful in terms of guiding policy, but it's actually really interesting to participate in, as you saw.
Wait, so how does that work? So basically, you're an advisor to the president at that time in the White House, and you guys are trying to figure out what to do with Katrina. Do you go to like a file and you're like, here's all the historical war games we've done?
I wish.
Option one.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for. I found that war game, there wasn't an exact war game that really prepared the federal government for that. I had kind of hoped that the dirty bomb scenario would like create some off the shelf stuff. Got us a little bit of the way there. But that was a situation of making policy kind of on the fly with imperfect information. And this is a time when you do also rely on rely on policy experts around the country. I mean, we were calling people who had written papers about this type of scenario, who had studied like what kinds of federal resources could be used most nimbly, and we had to make some decisions in a really short period of time. And President Bush wanted to have a really large response to this issue, and he had a plan of being out like in New Orleans within 10 days, and we had to have a bunch of big policy proposals. So we made a lot of decisions really quickly. Some of them were mistakes, in terms of the right kind of federal response. But that's different than when you're preparing for a State of the Union address, maybe 6 months ahead of time, where you got a lot of time to plan. So you're always looking for outside expertise. No administration has all that expertise within the White House or within the Office of Management and Budget. It just doesn't exist within one administration. And so you're always looking for people outside who know more about this issue than you do, involving them in the policy process. And so that's where think tanks come in. It's where people that have a perch at a university who are really good come in. And you find in those jobs that you really need those people. I was there during the run-up to the financial crisis too. There's a housing crisis that preceded the financial crisis, and that was the same thing where really, really smart, well-known, published economists had very different views about the reality of that situation. And it was really, really hard to know what to do, because some of the smartest people in the world whose advice you were relying on just saw this in sometimes 180-degree different ways from each other. But you still need to talk to those people, and you still need to make smart decisions. And if a White House is running well, it takes expertise actually very seriously.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, my friend Tim Kennedy, do you know him?
I don't.
You should have him to Civitas. But he's a active member of the military, but he was one of the people that went in for Pineapple Express, remember, in Afghanistan. And then he brought a group of people with Sabre allies to go get people out of North Carolina. And he was talking about what it looked like, on the ground there. But it's really interesting to think that, if you're in business, you might go to Harvard Business Review and look at the historical case studies and say, we have something going on here, like which other company has it ever been through? And you might pull some of those ideas to think like, could we solve it? Mm-hmm. I had never thought about, does the White House have like components that are like that?
Yeah. Really? Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you find you get thrown into these jobs and everything's moving so fast, and you have all the things that you're supposed to do that day. And then by 10 a.m., there's 4 more things that you hadn't planned on when you got up that morning to deal with. And so people's ability to focus for a long period of time on really important things is actually really limited. I mean, time is an amazingly scarce resource. And so having worked in that environment has given me a lot of sympathy for administrations that have come, after us, because when something big is happening in the world, and there's a lot of media criticism for what seems to be like double messaging coming out of the White House, or the administration doesn't seem to have its act together. I'm like, it's probably because they don't yet. Like they actually have had a couple advisors go out in front of cameras saying different things from each other. And maybe the president didn't even know they were out there saying that because they're trying to formulate a response. I mean, it sometimes just happens in sort of a chaotic way because of everything that's going on. So a smartly run administration kind of prepares for that. And you try to kind of pick your experts in advance, people that that you can trust, to get a good catalog of people around the country on a variety of issues, and hope your policy councils are all doing that. We used to have, like every summer, we would have the heads of think tanks from around Washington and also even outside, just handpick some of their own scholars and bring them in for like a 90-minute briefing. And we'd have the president's economic advisors, domestic policy, homeland security, national security. They would sit in a room and just let them kind of tell us about like what they saw as kind of big issues in the world, and they would become sort of a resource after that for our staff, because you can't staff that up internally very well.
No, I remember hearing something crazy that I don't remember if it's true or not. Is it true that the Pentagon has run like, I don't know how many war games about China versus the U.S. and we don't win in any of them?
I don't know
Taiwan.
Yeah, I don't know that. I hope that's not true.
I didn't sound very good.
Yeah, there's got to be a scenario within which we win, but I don't know.
Yeah, I remember Mackenzie, one of the scholars, was talking about that we didn't win any when they did it with the Senate and Congress. So like war games were run between the two groups and they didn't win any. But I was hoping, I mean, you would think the Pentagon wouldn't let that out either. They're not, I imagine they're not going to be like, the thing is, we're preemptively losing.
Yeah.
That's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, that's right. Or maybe that's what they want people to think.
Man,
Yeah.
this is 3D. So
yeah.
this is why I took the business. Okay. There was one other thing I wanted to talk about. You literally just got on a plane back from DC, and you were there all week. What's the vibe like there right now? Is everybody freaking out?
It wasn't as crazy as I thought it would be. Yeah, I mean, this trip was planned for a while, and so I kind of expected to be there, and they'd still be counting votes. You know, I didn't expect it, like everybody didn't really expect this to be resolved the evening of. It just depends on who you talk to. There's a lot of panic among Democrats. There's kind of a strange amount of optimism among people on the political right. I think probably when I say surprising, I think it's more people that have been Trump skeptics, Trump wary, and even anti-Trump. I think there's a number of them now that's like, well, we've seen the show before with him, and there's also some real opportunity for maybe some disruption and reform in areas where we need that. And he's got his issues that he's really hyper-focused on, but that means there's opportunity within his administration elsewhere to get all kinds of other things done that are broadly aligned with what he cares about. So it's kind of it was an interesting time. I mean, I think everyone's just kind of sitting there just nervously waiting to see what happens. And, you know, you go from one day where like Marco Rubio's name is floated for Secretary of State, and everyone's like, well, that's a good decision or whatever. And then the next day he puts forward Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. Everyone's like, what in the world is going on here? So it's like, here we go again, you know, sort of chaos and disruption. So there's kind of just nervous expectation, and some people are kind of nervously optimistic and others are nervously really, really worried right now. So like everything else over the last few months, all we can say is who really knows what it's gonna look like there come January. It's hard to say. And with John Thune becoming the Senate Majority Leader, that creates maybe a little bit of a break on the sort of MAGA elements in the Senate, because that was a hotly contested race too. Is Trump going to be able to get all of his people rubber stamped? Is he going to run into opposition within his own party? And I think given that vote, that's possible. So that'll create some dealing even within the GOP when it comes to appointments and decisions that are being made kind of early out of the gates.
Yeah. What about, well, first of all, I have been watching Twitter like it's prime time. I mean, I can't ever remember watching every cabinet position and say, like, who's it going to be? What's going to happen next? I think it's an American phenomenon that is reminiscent probably of like The Apprentice. I mean, it is incredible.
I think that's what they want you to do, right? Yeah. I got off Twitter before it became X. I mean, I burned out on it. Yeah, I got to the point where I realized I don't even like the people I like anymore. Yeah. My friends on Twitter who I've long loved and followed, I'm like, I don't even really like them anymore, so I'm just going to, I want to keep liking them, so I'm going to stop watching them on Twitter. And I hung it up. And to be honest with you, I've not missed it. I mean, I go there because people will make announcements there, or a lot of times in my world, there's a really interesting study that gets released, and someone tweets it out. So I find myself going over there for content, but I can't do it anymore because I used to do that too. I mean, election nights on Twitter used to be really fun, because just listening to everybody's hot takes. No,
watching X.
No.
Wow.
No, just watch the returns and stayed off of people's, hot takes and, all that stuff. Yeah, decided to sit it out. I felt a lot happier and better.
That's very mature of you.
No, I don't know it's mature. It was just some self-awareness about what makes me a better and worse person.
Well, I want to talk about what you're doing today, because one of the reasons I want to have you in here is because we talk about it a lot, but, the university system, it seems to have a lot of problems today. And, from us watching student protesters pro-Hamas at NYU to watching what happens with, different racial divides at school, to wondering if students and teachers are really learning these days. From an outside perspective, the university system kind of appears broken, or at least under attack in some way. And you decided to start the Civitas Institute at University of Texas. Why? And what do you think you guys are going to be able to do different from inside one of the world's largest universities, University of Texas?
Yeah, the Civitas Institute is a great new creation. It's created to essentially be part of a much larger effort to kind of reclaim a place within this large Tier 1 great esteemed public research university, to kind of recover the basic principles of the American founding, of a free society, of the kind of commercial and economic life that supports and is the lifeblood of that society, to teach it in a historically accurate and proper way, and to do research that kind of advances these ideas and helps us understand what a free society should be looking like in the future, and what a growing and dynamic economy should look like in the future, and where we can make reforms possible. So Civitas, the best way to think of it is kind of a university-based think tank committed to those principles. So I've come from a think tank in Washington to build this organization into a similar type of thing at a university, which gives you access to all the research power of an institution like this, and really great faculty and experts from around the country to be a part of it. We are joined at the hip with this other a really important new effort called the School of Civic Leadership, and now technically housed within that school, since institutes and centers typically have to be housed within a degree-granting college. And this is a really exciting effort. The school is about a year old. It was created by the regents about a year and a half ago, and so it goes through a process of getting stood up, where a dean gets appointed. That's Justin Dyer, a great political scientist who's the inaugural dean of the school. And we've been hiring faculty into the school. And so we have gone through our first round of faculty hiring this year. Those people have shown up this fall. We're going through another round now. And by about the third year, we'll have about 20 full-time faculty teaching in the school. And the school is very much committed to constitutional studies, Western civilization, economics. It has elements of what people who are familiar with the British PPE model of education. It's kind of, it's a philosophy, politics, and economics. It's like, I think every prime minister going back to who knows what did that at Oxford. It's a great way of getting a well-grounded education in these topics. That we don't call the degree that. We have a minor that's called that. The degree is called Civics Honors, and it combines these great elements of what we would think of as a really strong classical liberal arts education. And so we have the school that will have its inaugural freshman class next fall. And then we have the institute, which I run, which is standing up a whole bunch of different research programs and events on these issues of economic dynamism, political liberty, constitutional studies, and a bunch of policy papers on energy policy, education policy, a number of different types of things like that. So why is this important?
And why is it different?
Yeah.
Like what? Because a lot of schools have economic departments. They have history departments. Yeah. So at face level, people could be like, this exists already. What is any different about it?
So what's different about it in the School of Civic Leadership is the multidisciplinary aspect of it. So you can, the best way to think of, I think, the new School of Civic Leadership at UT is think of it as kind of an elite, small liberal arts college on this large public university campus. So this where students are studying these things together. Part of the problem in higher education today is just the fragmentation of studies, and so you can study American history without really ever studying the Constitution or without ever taking economics at a lot of universities. And this is a way for students, if they get enrolled in this school, they apply to come to UT and study in this school. This is their major. They're going to get this multidisciplinary degree, and I think that I think we'll attract a lot of students that want to go to law school or that want to get their MBA. I think we'll get a lot of students that want to go on and do graduate studies in policy, or they want to teach. I think it'll attract that sort of a student, and we're out putting out the word to get people to apply. And I think we have a lot of students coming from areas where they're just interested in the history of American institutions, and they're interested in the way that the economy is and the way it should work, and they want to study all those things together. There has been, I just think there has been this drift in higher education over the last generation to monocultures, where there has been this move of sort of political leftist ideology, which has